There he is.
Hello, Sachin.
How are you, my friend?
I'm good. It's nice to
Great.
see you again.
Likewise, likewise. I'm very honored to have this time with you, and I know how busy you are.
It's a
I,
pleasure. I
yeah,
see your taste in shirts hasn't changed since we met in Tucson.
it has not. Hey, I matched the artwork behind you a little bit,
That's
right?
right. Not like I was expecting your taste to change. I
But
just,
like, what's really funny is that artwork. Literally, I'm looking at it more closely now. I'm curious. What is it behind you? Did somebody draw that for you?
yeah. These are my former graduate students.
Okay.
Um, the big one is a former master's student. He was studying structural engineering,
Hmm.
and it drove him crazy. He took up painting just to try and calm his mind because he was smart enough to be a structural engineer, but it wasn't what he really wanted to do with his life. And it
Hmm.
won't surprise you to know that he never worked a day as a structural engineer in his life. He took up more artistic pursuits. So he gave me this one. The other
Wow.
ones, these are much more kind of Dr. Seuss, cartoonish, abstract. These are a doctoral student that I had,
Hmm.
and I think she was just painting for fun. She wasn't doing it as like stress release. She just had this creative self-expression side of her that
Yeah.
wasn't being fed by her doctoral studies. And so she graduated, and she gave me these. So now they're in the background of all my podcasts. And one day I got a text message from the former structural engineer. He said, "Hey, I recognize that backdrop."
Wow. What an honor it must be to see it up there.
Oh, it's wonderful. Like it reminds me, of my beloved students,
Mhm.
and it also reminds me I'm an engineer. I teach engineering at ASU, but the real innovation comes from this urge for creativity and self-expression.
Hmm. I love that. I love that.
Thanks.
Um, well, it's going to be really fun to get to know you, and more. I guess you would agree. More importantly, the work that you're putting out there in the world. Um, and I know it's bigger than you, which is what I love about how you show up. And I'm curious if it's okay with you. We can jump right in.
Let's do that.
I'm curious about where you see, like, if you could close your eyes and visualize the ideal world from Thomas's, point of view, perspective, what would the world look like with respect to the current work that you're doing? So help us paint the vision that you have with regards to your work.
The ice bath would be as ubiquitous as the hot tub. It would be as common in the United States as sauna is in Finland, in this world that we're imagining. Doctors would prescribe it. Insurance companies would pay for it. It would be part of what people talk about in their ordinary narratives about health. We're going into this holiday season. You're going to celebrate Thanksgiving before we get around to it in the United States.
Mhm.
But there's a series of events in our lives in the US. Starts with Halloween, the candy holiday, and then it moves into the gluttony holiday. And then we have all these parties at work and wherever else. The cookies that are on campus are going to be incessant. And then it all culminates in New Year's Eve, where people drink their faces off and wake up to make resolutions. And they say things like, "Oh, I should get into the gym. I should probably cut back on the desserts. I should get back into my ice bath." That's
Mm.
the vision of the world where people see some cold water immersion as part of the ordinary routine of staying healthy.
I'm seeing that happen, my friend. One ice bath at a time, one gym
Right.
at a
That's
time, one
great.
ice bath at a time, one river at a time, one lake at a time, because there's different ways we can adventure with the cold, which, I've done myself. And, one of the things that I'll say is cold sometimes, especially when something catches on like wildfire, so to speak, because I think cold is being mentioned a lot more lately it's becoming a lot more mainstream. I've been doing cold showers, so I know it's not the same thing, but we make do with what we have, right? So I've been doing cold showers for many, many years. I've been doing ice plunges. I've jumped in freezing lakes. However, what I haven't done, and I'm going to get better now because my gym just installed a cold plunge, is consistently expose myself to a cold plunge or an ice bath. So I've done it, as any opportunity I have, I'm in there. And now that the gym has a cold plunge, it's not an ice bath, and we'll maybe distinguish the difference between the two. I'm in there consistently, so I'm excited for that to be part of my weekly routine, because every day we do things a little bit different. And I'm honored to have this conversation with you, because who better to speak to about this topic, and who better to educate our middle-aged men and women who have the resources, right? Who have the intellect and have the maturity to explore new opportunities. And I believe that in our darkest cave, as Joseph Campbell says, in our darkest cave lies our greatest treasure. So the very thing that so many people are probably avoiding because of the perceived discomfort, right? I view it as exhilaration, and I think once somebody gets in there, they might feel the same way. But it's something that, where our greatest treasure metabolically can potentially lie. And I see the same potential in breath. That's kind of my jam. However, breath and cold go hand in hand, right? Metabolically speaking. So that's what I'm really stoked about in this conversation. And I wanted to also thank you for a copy of your book,
Oh, I'm glad.
Uncommon
Yeah,
Cold.
good.
So I've
Uncommon cold.
Yes. So thank you for this. And I've started reading it, and it's just filled with all kinds of testimonials and case studies, and it's heavily cited and referenced. You've published 150 articles, is my understanding,
Correct.
which makes you, one of the leading experts on this topic. And and again, I think that I'd love to use this time with you to dispel some of the myths, perhaps even encourage people who've never done a cold plunge before, where they can get started. Maybe they start with different interventions. I know there's questions I have for you that will unpack that might help us take baby steps into the cold, right? Or maybe it's to just jump right in. So thank you again, and yeah, let's jump right in. I see the vision that you're trying to create. I am on board with that vision and that mission, because I believe that we need to have people becoming more aware of what works. And there's nothing that gives you more bang for your buck for a couple minutes a day, right? And very little post effort, right? You just kind of enjoy the benefits afterwards, than ice plunging and cold plunging. So where do you think is the best place for people to start if they're new to this concept or idea?
Sachin, you got Lake Ontario right there.
Mm-hmm.
Do you ever go to the beach?
I do. The polar plunge. Yeah.
That's right. I don't think it's going to be crowded while the Blue Jays are in the World Series. You might have a good spot.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
that's a place to start. If you're
Okay.
in a cold climate, the best way to do cold plunge therapy is in nature. Go to the stream, go to the mountains, go to the lake, go to the ocean. If you're on the Pacific Ocean, especially, it's cold all the way up and down. If you're on the Atlantic or the Gulf of Mexico, then you got to pretty much wait to winter. That is, if you're just starting out, what you want is cold that will make you gasp. So I say, go cold enough to gasp and long enough to shiver. This is how you can monitor your own physiological response and say, well, is this right for me? I live in Phoenix, Arizona. There's no lake. I could drive 2 hours up into the mountains in Payson and I can get into a stream, and which I've done, and it's wonderful. But I live in downtown Phoenix in a high-rise apartment. I need a machine. And even though the nature is the best way to get cold, Morosco is the next best thing to nature. Here I can
Mm.
control the temperature because it's on my balcony. I can go out and I can do just a couple minutes if I want. There's nothing stopping me. There's no excuses that prevent me from doing what I need to do. So a machine, I used to say you could start with cold showers, you could start with filling up your tub, and you can. But the harder it is, the less you're going to do it, the more likely you are to quit. When you get serious about cold plunge therapy, you buy a machine, you put it in your home. Now, Morosco makes the most rugged, most cold, most terrible machine you could possibly want to pay $15,000 more in Canadian for. George Adair, I think, was the one who said, everything you want is on the other side of fear.
Mm.
And it gets back to that Joseph Campbell quote, which has been rephrased so many times. I think it was Maston Kipp who said, fear is a compass that points you in the direction of your dreams. And
Mm.
so if you have to buy bags of ice or if you have to go through some of these additional efforts, you're never going to do it. Morosco is going to make its own ice. It's going to be floating up there on top of the water, and you are going to feel that knot in the pit of your stomach that says, I don't really have to do it today. I could probably skip a day. That happens to me all the time. And then you go in and you do it anyway, because that's how you build your own psychological resilience.
Yeah, there's a part of our brain that we develop when we do things that are perceived as hard. And from what I understand is that hating the thing that you're actually doing develops that part of our brain, as opposed to, doing it because you love it. Right. And so when somebody says, oh, I hate the cold, I'm like, well, that's exactly why you need to do it, because you will actually grow as a human being doing the thing that you don't want to do, knowing that it's not, of course, going to kill you. I mean, when people ask me how is it, I tell them it's cold. It's exactly as it is. What do you expect it to be? I'm not going to say it's hot. I'm not going to necessarily even say it's easy. It's cold, right? However, it lights us up in a way, at least for me, and I'm sure you would agree too. It lights us up in a way from the inside that we can't really get with food or supplementation or exercise or other forms of stimulation. So it's an experience that everyone should have at least once before they decide if it's for them or not.
Correct. The best way is to try it
Mm.
and see what it's like. I think you and I have probably seen the same episode of Andrew Huberman where he had David Goggins on and he was talking about the anterior mid-cingulate cortex in the brain,
Yes.
the part of the brain where willpower resides. He says, when you do these things that you don't want to do, that are really hard, but you do them anyway, it grows that part of the brain. He said something like scientists believe that is now the seat of the will to live. So
Mm.
you train your brain to do those difficult things that you know are good for you, but you would really rather procrastinate on if you could. Every reason that I've heard, excepting a few medical, and I'll talk about them in a second, but every reason that I've heard from somebody to say, well, the cold's not right for me. I don't do well in the cold, or I'm scared of the cold, or whatever, is exactly the reason why they should do the cold. The most extreme is Raynaud's. And Raynaud's is a spastic overreaction in the smooth muscle tissue that controls circulation to the extremities. So a person with Raynaud's
Mhm.
will get out in a little bit of cold and they will have an extreme and painful vasoconstriction that shuts off blood flow to their fingers. Their fingers might turn white or gray. David Goggins has Raynaud's and he's posted about it on Instagram. So you might say, well, what about people with Raynaud's? The irony is, I know three people who have resolved their Raynaud's using cold plunge therapy. Raynaud's is associated with thyroid dysfunction. And how does your thyroid get dysfunctional? Well, the thyroid is in constant communication with something called brown fat to control the metabolism in your body. Most adult human beings have no brown fat because they're not getting enough cold. But if you get into the ice bath for 2 weeks and you go every day, your body will recruit new brown fat. The brown fat converts the inactive form of thyroid hormone into the active form. So, in this way, your brown fat can make more active thyroid hormone than your thyroid does. Once you restore the brown fat, it modulates the function of the thyroid. So if you have underactive, thyroid comes up. If you have overactive, thyroid comes down. So people have used cold plunge therapy to resolve their Hashimoto's or resolve their Graves and resolve their Raynaud's, which indicates a thyroid condition. And this is the irony. It's part of life. If your
Hmm.
doctor is saying, well, you don't tolerate the cold very well, you should probably turn the thermostat up and stay warm. He's telling you exactly the wrong thing. Well, your muscles aren't very strong. You should probably not lift any weights. Doesn't make any sense, does it? You know that you have to challenge your body to get a response from your body. And cold is a wonderful challenge.
Yeah, I love that. People who are listening to this, practitioners, many of them are practitioners, might be in their head with like, what's the protocol, right? How long do they have to do it? And what's the temperature have to be? So, how do we get out of our clinician head? I know the gasp to shiver method seems to be a good starting point, but does the protocol or the recommendations change for somebody who has a condition like that?
When people go to the doctor, it's because the people are scared. They think something's wrong with them. They Even if you bring a child to a well child visit at the pediatrician is going to want to load you up on vaccines. Well, you don't want your child to die of measles, do you? You don't want your child to die of diphtheria or rubella or whatever the hell else, the hepatitis B, for goodness sakes. The medical establishment both creates the fear that bring the patients, the customers in, and then it creates the mechanisms to assuage that fear. Take this pill. Take it according to my prescription. Take this statin, or take this whatever the hell it's going to be. And in this way, they kind of do a psychological number on their patients by creating the anxiety and then giving them the directions to take the anxiety away. And most of it is mythological. That is, the pharmaceutical industry has convinced us you can do one pill to treat one symptom, at one time with one dose. And it's all a bunch of nonsense. The body is a complex, interconnected system. They'll tell you that whatever happened to you as a result of taking their pill that you didn't enjoy was a side effect. And I said, that's bullshit. There's no such thing as side effects. There are only effects. These are
Mhm.
the effects of taking this pill. Explosive diarrhea, stomach cramping, insomnia, whatever the hell they have to say, on the television ads. There are other therapies which are systemic. They act on the whole body at the whole time. For example, if you exercise, you get smarter. Now, how the hell does that happen, Sachin? How can you gain cognitive function by doing push ups? It wasn't like your brain was doing the work, but because exercise is a systemic therapy, the so called side effects are all positive. You're working on the entire
Mhm.
body. Cold is like that. Cold is a systemic benefit to the body. Everything gets better because cold improves your metabolism and life runs on metabolism. There is no one prescription to the cold. Instead of thinking like a clinician, you have to think like a personal trainer. If I came to you and I said, well, I want to start a program of weightlifting, what's the one best weight and the one best set of exercises or number of reps or something like that? You'd laugh at me. You'd say, well, hang on a second. Let's not get crazy. We're going to try you on this weight and we're going to see how does that go for you. Maybe we'll try 10 or 12 reps. We're looking for the weight where it's really hard for you to finish those last couple reps. And that's what's going to be right for you. So when I say go cold enough to gasp and long enough to shiver, it's a rule of thumb. I don't know what your prior state of cold training is. I don't know how well acclimated to the cold you are. So you got to find that temperature, which is kind of like the weight, and say, whatever makes me gasp, that's the right place to start. And then you stay in, this is kind of like the reps, long enough until you start to feel the urge to shiver. You can stay in longer if you want. If you're, shooting an Instagram video or you're trying to press a girl or something like that, it's fine. If you want to show off, and I like showing off, you can stay in. But all you need to do is get a little bit of that urge to shiver, and you know that you have activated your body's response. Your body is now making adaptations inside to improve its thermoregulatory function. Then do it again the next day. And maybe set that temperature down just 1 degree Fahrenheit. If you want, a half degree C is fine, but you just go down a little bit. If you said, well, let me see, I did 15 degrees C, I can probably do 14 degrees C. A week later, you're sitting at 8, and that's pretty cold. A week later, you're sitting at 1, and you're in freezing water, just like I am, getting all that fear and that psychological anxiety response. You don't have to stay in for very long. And this is the advantage of having the machine at home, where you can set your temperature and you can go in whenever, twice if you like, but you can go in whenever you want to sort of microdose your cold.
I have a jacuzzi in my main bathroom, and I keep telling my wife we need to replace this thing because we never get in there, and we should put an ice plunge in there, a Morosco maybe, and it would be so much more utilized.
There's a
So,
problem with the jacuzzi. Most people don't know jacuzzi was an Italian American living in California, and I think his parents were born in Italy, and I think he was born here, but you can't quote me on that. In any case, he had a son who suffered from, if I'm remembering it right, arthritis. And the son would take these warm baths. Jacuzzi figured out, because they were driving into Berkeley to get treated at the hospital. Jacuzzi figured out that the whirlpool they had him at Berkeley could be recreated at home if he rigged up a pump that he could immerse in their bathtub to swirl the water around. This is how the jacuzzi was invented, and it was first a whirlpool tub. But there are three things that are wrong with it. The first one is the chlorine in the water. People have been visiting the natural hot springs, for
mm,
millennia, and we understand the healing power of the natural hot spring. There's no chlorine in that hot spring. That
right.
chlorine, or sorry, that hot spring is reductive in its electrochemistry. Chlorine is oxidative. And so the chlorine, which is poisonous anyway, is taking you electrochemically in the wrong direction. The second thing is that in your tap water, when you fill up your jacuzzi, you're using the tap water from, I don't know, the city. And there's no minerals in it. When you get into a natural hot spring, it's coming out of like some ancient volcano, and it is rich in minerals, which you will absorb transdermally, through your skin.
Hmm.
The third thing that's wrong with the hot tub is it's not grounded. When you're in the natural hot spring, it's coming out of the ground and you're electrically connected to the ground, and you instantaneously get in electrical balance with the earth. When you get into your, fiberglass or your acrylic jacuzzi in your bathtub, you're not grounded. And so you're getting into chlorinated water with no minerals. As a matter of fact, it's got fluorine in there, or fluoride, instead of the minerals that you really need, and no connection to ground. It's no wonder that you never use it. I mean, it's nice to have, but
Hmm.
it doesn't have the health effects. And you're not trying to overcome arthritis. So these hot tubs have become ubiquitous, and we're going to make them obsolete. Because at Morosco, we have invented what's called the mineral bath, and it fixes all three of these problems. First of all, anything with the Morosco brand on it is grounded. From our cheapest ice bath all the way up, this mineral bath is $50,000 US. So it's not for everybody, but it's grounded. The second thing is you can use as much Epsom salt as you want. You can even put in a little zinc sulfate. You can put in some potassium sulfate. I like having copper sulfate in mine. It helps with the water quality, and I get a little transdermal copper benefit. And then the third thing is in the Morosco mineral bath, you can turn off the ozone and turn on the hydrogen. When you go to hydrogen, you get to that reductive electrochemical state, just like a natural hot spring. It takes about 40 minutes, maybe 30 minutes to change your chemistry from ozone dominated to hydrogen dominated. And so you got to set it and then leave it. And then you can come back and you have the hydrogen benefit. You can get the transdermal absorption of the hydrogen, which will help if you're in chronic oxidative stress. One of the reasons you can't do that at home, you can buy a portable machine from Echo. We use the Echo machine to produce our hydrogen. And you can wheel it up to your jacuzzi, but by the time you've overcome the chlorine and you've got the hydrogen going, now the water is going to be cold. So you need this combination of things, the heat, the electrical grounding, and all of the parts that are manufactured tolerant of the salt to bring that natural hot spring into your house. So somebody said, I was talking to them about launching this product. I said, $50,000. And I go, yeah, it's a lot of money. He goes, no, that's cheap. I said, what do you mean? He goes, do you know what it costs to buy a business class ticket to Japan and get into their, hot baths in the volcanic areas of Japan? And I go, well, I guess that's a good point. I've been to Iceland. I've been to El Salvador. I've been to Colombia. I've been into all their hot springs, and it wasn't cheap. He goes,
Hmm.
I can understand why 50,000 is a barrier for a lot of people. But once again, when you have it in your yard, when you have it at your home, you get in there every day. Of course, you're feeling the benefits instead of just staring at the jacuzzi you never use in your bathroom. How much did that cost you?
I mean, frankly, it was there when we bought the house because I would have never
Right.
put it there. I would have installed a cold bath or an ice bath in there personally. So now it's
More and
like
more
a
people are doing that. Yep.
yeah. So now it's more of a retrofit, and it seems like that's entirely possible from what you're sharing. Do most people
Correct.
install their tubs outdoors or indoors?
With the mineral bath, it's so big and it needs 220-volt power. We built it for two. They're going outdoors right now.
Mm.
We don't do a mini mineral bath, although it might be on our horizon, that you can install indoors with all the same features. With the ice baths, I'd say about a third of them are going outdoors. There's some concerns. You can't just like buy any old cold plunge off of Alibaba and then say it's good for outdoors. When you read the fine print, they will show you an ad with the machine and snow and trees and stuff. But when you read the fine print, if you install it outdoors, you void your warranty because it's not protected, ironically, from freezing. Freezing water will break a typical cold plunge, but it won't break a Morosco. Morosco makes its own ice. So we warranty the ice bath down to -10 Fahrenheit. And I forget what the conversion is in Celsius, but we also have a winter package. If that's not enough, we got a call from Minnesota and they're like, well, we want to have it outside. And sometimes it gets down to -40. And that could be Celsius or Fahrenheit because that's where they
They
cross.
meet, yeah.
We said, okay, we'll add a package that will keep your water liquid and running even at -40 outside. And of course, the irony there is that the water is warmer than the air is. There's some safety precautions that you have to take when you
Mm.
get out because, shoot, at -40, your spit freezes in the air before it even hits the snow. And you have to be careful with wet skin in such cold weather. But you can manage it, and your Morosco is going to be fine.
Yeah, can you imagine that going into the the cold plunge, or I keep saying cold plunge ice bath. Are you using those interchangeably? Is it okay if I use that, or I want to make sure I'm using the right
There's a
nomenclature?
difference. The ice bath will make ice, but the terms became interchangeable, especially when Joe Rogan got a Morosco. And I remember his first post, he was like, dang, there's ice in this ice bath. Well, that's the way it works, Joe. But he adopted the term cold plunge. And the reason was Wim Hof is going around, he's talking about ice baths. You start with, a trough or something and you fill it up with water and you put a bunch of ice. There's ice floating in it. So you think, well, that's an ice bath. But it's really hard to get the temperature down below around 8 or 9 degrees Celsius, which is cold, but it's not freezing because the ice is constantly melting in that type of ice bath. So if you're starting with a trough and you fill it up from the hose and you're dumping ice in it, it's very hard to get it down to the 1 or 2 degrees C.
Mm.
Morosco does that because it makes its own ice. And so now we have a distinction between a cold plunge, which is incapable of making ice, and an ice bath, which will make its own. There used to be really no distinction because of the way Wim Hof was popularizing these cold plunges that you made with ice that you had to pour in. But now it's kind of important. When you start a regular practice of cold plunging, you'll crank that thing all the way down to its lower limit, which is about 37 degrees. And they can't go any lower because if ice forms inside the chiller, everything breaks. You can go on Reddit and you can,
Hmm.
long posts about this. So maybe you get to the 37 degrees Fahrenheit and, I forget exactly what that's going to be Celsius, but you're in those single digits and you become acclimated. Now, for me, it's boring. Like, if I don't really have the ice, I don't get that anticipatory anxiety. I've got
Mm.
6 inches sitting in my Morosco on my porch this morning. I'm supposed to be shooting a video on Renaud's and ginger tea with cinnamon and things like that. And instead, I'm podcasting with you because I'm like, if I wait an hour, it'll only be 4 inches. It's once you get that ice floating up in there and you're close to the freezing point of water, is when that fear response will come back. But it's not going to happen at the lower limit of one of these cheaper cold plunges. You will be acclimated and you'll get in and you'll say, okay, that was good. I've done my 5 minutes and now I'll get out.
Mm. What is now, again, I know it's easy for this to become a thing of the ego, right? Especially with social media and Instagram and everyone, one person trying to outdo the other person. Uh, and again, going back to the gasp to shiver framework, is there such a thing as overdoing it?
Oh, yeah, there is. You can overdo exercise. You can overdo anything that is a hormetic stressor. The classic hormetic stress curve is an upside down U, and food is a great example. If you don't have enough food, your health suffers. And so you eat one cheeseburger, you feel pretty good. You eat 4 cheeseburgers and you're like, nah, I'm doing great. But you can't eat a fifth cheeseburger. You'll throw up. The more you eat, after you cross that threshold of just the right amount, then
Mm-hmm.
you begin to experience ill effects again. The same is true of exercise. The same is true of sunshine. The same is true of sleep. You need your 8, 9 hours. Sometimes you catch up on the weekend, but you can't sleep all frickin' day or ill effects will set in again. And cold is like this too. If you don't have any cold in your life, you will not have any brown fat. Your thyroid becomes dysregulated. The accumulations of mitochondrial damage result in insulin resistance and you become metabolically unwell. Add a little bit of cold. For Susanna Soberg, who surveyed her Danish winter swimmers, she asked them, how often do you swim? How long do you stay in there? 11 minutes a week, she said, was average. That doesn't mean it's the minimum effective dose. That doesn't mean it's a magical dose. It just means that the people she talked to were on average doing 11 minutes a week at about 4 degrees Celsius. When you get a little bit of cold, you keep yourself insulin sensitive, metabolically healthy, you keep your brain sharp, you keep yourself adapted to stress, but too much and you can induce brain fog. You lose all motor control. You can't, operate your phone anymore because your extremities don't work. And I've done too much, trying to impress people. If I'm having a hard time with a take and I got to do it 3 times, I might be up to my neck in chunks of ice for 14 minutes or something like that. Then I have a whole protocol for rewarming. Fortunately, I'm in Phoenix and I can go outside in the sunshine, which is great for me anyway.
Mm-hmm.
I'll do the kettlebells or I'll do some squats, something to get the circulation going back into my limbs. But one time, I'd overdone it. I did like 22 minutes and it was all about trying to impress a lady. We were supposed to go to hot yoga together afterwards, but I couldn't drive, Sachin. I have a stick, and I didn't have my full faculties. So I had to rewarm in the sunshine. We wound up late at hot yoga. They let us in anyway because, they're not fascist about it or something, I guess. And I'm having trouble with my half moon monkey twist pose or whatever I'm supposed to be doing. And the instructor is trying to help me out and it's going nowhere. So finally, she comes over and she puts her hands on me and she repositions my body so I can get the pose right. And we have a wonderful session. Afterwards, I go up to her because I know I disrupted her class. And I'm like, thank you, for being patient with me. And the correction you did in my pose was really important. And it felt like got me zoned in. And she said, oh, that's no problem. It's what we do. But I have a question for you. Oh, what's that? She goes, was it hot enough for you in that room? And I said, well, I think so. What did you have it almost 120 degrees or something? It seemed pretty hot. She goes, no, because when I put my hand on your back, you felt cold to me. And I'm like, I got to crank up the thermostat for this guy. And I had to explain the whole thing. If you overdo the cold, the antidote is rewarming and have a nap. The world record is 4.5 minutes in a box of ice cubes. I'm sorry, 4.5 hours in a box of ice cubes, like up to Andre Billuby's jawline. You're
Hmm.
not going to break the world record. But if you're going for it, rewarm, have a nap, red light, sunshine. Some people don't have a sauna, but I live in Phoenix. You can just get in the car, crank
Mhm.
up the heat. Don't do this in the garage, but you know what I'm saying. Crank up the heat in your car. In Phoenix, it'll be up to 180 degrees Fahrenheit before you know it. So I don't know how it would work in Toronto, but you can run a car sauna if you've overdone it. Just don't drive.
Yeah, turn on the seat heaters or get maybe a warm blanket or something like that can potentially be
It's
helpful.
incredible how hot our cars can become when you think about it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, glad everything turned out okay from that incident.
I'm still here.
I'm still here. Um, I've heard people say this to me, and I want to speak to you about what your thoughts are. Where they'll tell you to just dip your face in cold water or put a cold pack on your chest. What are your thoughts on therapies like that? Are those good starting points for people, or is it creating a completely different effect than being in the ice bath?
Most people understand they can start with a cold shower. And metabolically, this is good. But whole body cold water immersion and partial body are different. And there's some clinical trials on this. If you do the cold shower, just as an example, you will get the gasp reflex. You will activate the sympathetic division of your central nervous system. So that's the fight or flight response. What you don't get in the cold shower is the dive reflex. You never get the parasympathetic response, which some people call rest and digest. And this
Mm-hmm.
is why cold showers just make me angry. The ice bath, at first, it's very energizing, and there's a blood glucose spike associated with release of glycogen from your liver. At first, your heart is like, what are you doing? But after 15 or 30 seconds, everything starts to come down. That's the dive reflex. You structure your breath and it will slow down. Your heart will slow down. Your brain goes down involuntarily into a deeper meditative state. And after about 30 seconds, I'm like, what was I even worried about? I get a calming effect. Now, if you start with the cold pack on your chest, like the cold shower, you might get revved up, and metabolically, it can be good for you, but you're never going to get that parasympathetic response.
Mm.
If you start by immersing your face in, I don't know, a kitchen bowl of ice water or something like that, you can get the dive reflex, but you can't get the metabolic response. So, how do you put all of these together? Is you get into the ice bath or the cold plunge, you go whole body. Some people say they like dunking their head, other people don't. I do it and I do it really quick. I've never spent more than 11 seconds underneath in the water. There is something called surfer's ear, where cold water can get into your ear. And if you do this for too long, it needs to be treated. This is why the physicians have this syndrome called the surfer's ear. And the treatment is surgery. It's no fun. So I don't want cold water in my ears, and I don't like it on the top of my head, but I do enjoy my head dunk. So as you don't need to do the whole face to get the dive reflex. You can just go in up to your neck. Your body knows. Your body is preparing itself to go dive. You're going to get lobsters, you're going to spear fish, or, whatever your ancestors did in the cold water. Your body has the memory of that in its mitochondria, and it will prepare you in this way.
I love that. Our bodies are so wise. We've got these mechanisms hardwired into us, and again, very simple for us to activate them by incorporating what you just shared. So thank you for that. You mentioned something that piqued my interest, which is the breath, and you talked about how the breath becomes more structured, and you talked about the reflex. So, uh, you know, so one of the things that I tell people to do, and I'm more than open to be corrected because I want to get it right, is I tell them to exhale when they enter into the water to help them know that they're safe. And you mentioned the gasp. So do we want to encourage them to gasp, or do we to activate that stress response, or do we want to encourage them to exhale when they enter into the water?
I think you're doing great. The gasp reflex is involuntary. If you're cold enough, you're going to feel it. And don't shame them, for experiencing it. It's okay if they have the gasp reflex. The challenge is to structure their breath. If they cannot control their breath, they're going to jump right the hell out.
Mm-hmm.
The parasympathetic division, this rest and digest, it runs the involuntary systems of your body. How did the intestines know to digest? How does your heart know to speed up, when you're going up the stairs? Well, these are automatic. Like, you don't have to tell your heart to do this. You don't have to tell your intestines to do that. The breath exists at the border of the automatic, the voluntary, and the involuntary. It's this gateway. If you're going up the stairs, you're going to start breathing harder. You don't have to tell your lungs to do that, but you can consciously override that for a little
Mm-hmm.
bit and say, wait a second, I don't want to breathe right now. I want to hold my breath, or I want to extend my exhale. And so the breath is this window into the unconscious part of the parasympathetic division, that part that most people can't control. But once you've practiced with the breath as that gateway, then other things open up. Wim Hof says he can control his brown fat with the power of his mind. And I believe him. That is, he can turn on his brown fat with his thoughts. He's not the only one. There are other things that you can do inside your body. Now, I've only read about this. I've never met anyone who could do it, who could slow his heart rate down through the power of his mind. These things that we think are involuntary, they're attached to our mind and our thoughts, just like everything else. It's usually we don't attend to them. So any instruction that you give your students is going to open up to them what they used to think was out of their control, that they actually can control. You tell them to exhale. It's totally okay if they were to gasp reflex and then say, oh, Sachin told me to exhale as I get in. And then they begin to become aware of their breath and they concentrate on structuring it intentionally. I suspect, I don't know, but I suspect that if you told them, okay, give me a big inhale as you get into the water and then a long exhale, you would find very similar benefits because you've made the breath conscious. And I don't think you're
Mm-hmm.
doing anything wrong by asking them to exhale as they get in. I don't think that the gasp reflex, exaggerating it or experience it, is an essential part of this practice. They're going to feel cold. They're going to get the sympathetic activation. It doesn't
Mm.
need any help. What they usually need the help with is turning that parasympathetic on, box
Okay.
breathing, breathe while you count. Anything that raises their breath to conscious awareness and ask them to structure it is going to get them through that initial sympathetic reaction.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. So we either box breathing or just focusing on lengthening the exhale, breathing in and out through the nose,
Those
uh,
are my favorites.
and bringing that awareness to their breath versus the rest of whatever's going on in
Yep.
their body, and really using it as a steering wheel, a direct access point into the nervous system to shift into that parasympathetic state. And what I want people to visualize what's happening is as their extremities go into the water to preserve the core temperature, the blood vessels are constricting, and as we slow down our breath, we're actually that also draws more blood into the core because that stimulates rest, digest, reproduce, rejuvenate all those systems in our body. So we're actually sending more, flow, if you will, to the vital organs in our body as we're doing the cold. And it's developing resilience in our nervous system, which I think we've become very dissociated with our nervous systems this day and age. And when we're dissociated, we're dysregulated and usually skew towards a sympathetic dominant state. And none of our health goals live in that state of function except survival, right? So immediate survival needs are met by being in a sympathetic dominant state. But then every health objective we have lives on the parasympathetic side of the fence, which means that I think it's crucial that we find ways to access that aspect of our nervous system, activate it, and certainly cold is one of those mechanisms that we can do that with.
There are good reasons for our sympathetic overstimulation. There's a good reasons for being dissociated from our nervous state or our nervous system. When we grow up, I'm going to call it civilization. That's not really the right term. We are surrounded. I live in downtown Phoenix. I'm surrounded by this infrastructure, these artificial environments. For me to just drive my car would be overwhelming with like nervous system stimuli. And you know this if you can think back to when you first started driving. You didn't know what the hell you were doing. You didn't know what to ignore. Everything might have seemed relevant. But now that we're habituated to driving, we're able to shut that off, not pay any attention to that. We're focused just on that signal. Maybe there's something coming through in our peripheral vision. We must ignore 90% of whatever is coming at our nervous system so we can focus on the one or two things that we need in that moment in this urban environment. Then you go out, I don't know, you go to the beach or you go sailing or you go to the rainforest and you are separated from all of the urban overstimulation, and it can bring your senses back online. Now, all of a sudden, a little bit of a change in the breeze or a change in the way the water smells is telling you something. You might not know how to interpret it, but you're like, I had no idea that the rain had its own scent, until you get back in touch with everything that your body is capable of perceiving that you have on purpose, muted so that you can live in an artificial infrastructure environment of where we are. I agree with you that the sympathetic division is what keeps us alive. And ironically, we're safer than we ever really have been. And we're constantly bombarded with sympathetic overload as if there is a life-threatening situation at any moment. Just crossing the street can be a sympathetic activation because
Mm-hmm.
you are close to death. That's, I think, why you say the healing exists in the parasympathetic side for those of us that live in these highly mechanized, industrialized societies.
It's, one of the things I've noticed a distinction in human designed and created buildings and architecture is everything's straight, right? All the lines are perfect, the circles are perfect. Where in nature, everything is rough. And that roughness is, fractal in nature, is the math behind it versus kind of this Euclidean straight line math that we use. And even that can be very jarring to our nervous systems. And why I love what you said about being outside, just really gets us present. Whereas when we're indoors, surfaces can be very boring. That's why I love the art behind you. And I noticed it right away is because it has texture and depth and emotion in it as well.
The wonderful thing about those straight lines and those 90-degree angles is that they are efficient. They reduce costs.
Mm.
But the terrible thing is that they disconnect us from the right sort of visual cues on which we rely. There's a woman, if I'm remembering her name is right, it's Janine Benyus, and she wrote a book called Biomimicry. And she was trying to teach architects and engineers how to incorporate those principles of design that exist in nature into our built infrastructure. She had the interface carpet executives. They'd read her book and they were talking with her about carpet design or something. She took them out to the forest and she said, "Here's the forest floor. Point out to me the leaf that is out of place." Of course, all the leaves are right wherever you would think the leaves would be. And you can go pick up one leaf and you can throw it somewhere else, and none of the leaves look out of place. But if you go into, a high-rise corporate office, everybody can see the stain on the carpet or the place where this carpet is worn out more than it is in
Mm.
other places. Nothing is consistent and it looks out of place. Interface redesigned their carpets so that they looked more like the forest floor. And now nothing looks out of place. Now I'm going to pick on you for a little bit. Suppose you, I don't know, spill wine on your shirt. On that shirt, who's going to notice?
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
It's like I call it the Indian food shirt. You can wear it to an Indian food restaurant. You'd be perfectly fine. You don't have to worry about getting a stain on it. It'll
That's
blend right
right.
in. Thomas, this has been very enlightening, and I'm so grateful for our time today. I feel like we're kindred spirits in many ways, and I love the work that you're doing. And I've got the Morosco on my bucket list, and I'm gonna, point everyone in this to the direction of this interview because a lot of our clients that we work with, practitioners, are working with their clients to have metabolic breakthroughs. The people watching this who are not clients of ours but are interested health seekers, they're looking for metabolic breakthroughs. And I believe that the next breakthroughs in health and wellness and vitality are going to be simple. Right now, I know the Morosco has a lot of intelligent design in its creation, but simple in the fact that it's just cold,
Right.
right? It's just breath, right? So
Yep.
like that
You
is the
didn't need to
next
sequence the
frontier,
human genome to come up with cold plunge therapy.
right?
You've already been designed to benefit from cold plunge therapy. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. So thank you for this. Where can people learn more about the Morosco? I love your Instagram video, so I'd love to make sure we point people there. How can people follow more of your work and take that plunge, so to speak, when they're ready?
Sachin, for you, there is a man in Toronto called Mark Bruno, and he runs a firm called Heal Faster Canada. When you're ready to go into Morosco, look him up, Heal Faster Canada, write to him and say, "Hey, Professor Seager said I should come down and see you and get into one of your machines," and he'd be
Mm.
happy to have you. So those people in Southern Ontario who, they're sick of Lake Ontario and they want to try it in a machine, that's what Mark Bruno is for. He's a Canadian dealer, especially in the residential market. He's not far from you, and he'll have one that you can try. If you want to keep track of me and the science, I am Seager TP. I'm on Instagram. I got a big mouth on Twitter. You might not want to follow me there, but it's SEAGERTP. Morosco Forge, MO. It doesn't matter. We're like the number one Google search for 4 different misspellings of Morosco. You go to Morosco Forge, you hit the science tab, and you'll have all my articles. There's like 149 of them. Almost everything I've ever written is available for free online. But if you're one of those people and you're like me, and you write in the book and you have like the posted notes and stuff, you can go to Amazon to get the Uncommon Testosterone book. You can go to moroscoforge.com and you can buy the Uncommon Cold book.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you for
You're
the work that you're
welcome.
doing. Thank you for your energy. Thank you for your passion. And thank you for your time today.
It's my pleasure. I'll talk to you soon.
Bye for now.